Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted episode 41. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
And we are joining you today with some new equipment that we're just getting to grips with. So give us a little time and I'm sure we will come to you with even more impressive output. But for now, it's all thanks to you and your support. Thank you to all of you who have donated, made donations. Please visit our website, catholicunscripted.com, and join the mailing list. So if you scroll to the bottom, join the mailing list and we'll keep you updated with any news, including any live events that we plan from the new year, from January. But thank you very much again to all of you who have joined and are supporting us. So quite a lot to talk about in today's episode. So let's do our best to get through. We'll begin with the Germans. So Pope Francis warns Germany is steering away from the universal church. The Synodal Way participants endorsed texts calling for women deacons, re-examination of priestly celibacy, lay preaching, same-sex blessings, and so on. And then these four, are they all laymen, Mark? Brilliant German names, by the way. Westerhortmann, Schloss, and Schmidt. So all these wonderful German lay folk opted out of the synodal process, and Pope Francis has written to them saying that the Synodal Way's proposed structure is not in alignment with the sacramental structure of the Catholic Church. Consequently, its formation was forbidden by the Holy See in January 2023. And Westerhortmann says, I'm very grateful for the letter from Pope Francis and appreciate the Pope's clarity, wait for this, which reveals his position unambiguously. That's not a word we often associate with our dear Holy Father. But what do we think about this then? What do we have to say on the latest developments on the German Synodal Way? And Pope Francis speaking up and saying it's not good. Mark?
I'm not sure that he is. I don't think it is very unambiguous. I think it is typically ambiguous. It's like, first of all, why has he published this letter, which is to 3 or 4 German theologians who they're obviously worried about the direction that the Synodal Weg is going in. So they've written to the Pope, and it, by way of response, is, I think it's kind of an ambiguous response that he's saying, and he's referring to something that he wrote to them before, saying that, to the German bishops, saying that, they had to move together with the universal church and they run the risk of stepping outside, like unity, but it doesn't say. Well, and then later on, Parolin, doesn't he? I don't know if you've got to that bit, but basically, then it was sort of followed up after that by Cardinal Parolin, who said that there were some red lines, and the red lines that he said were the Church's teaching on same-sex unions or relationships, and women priesthood, which I thought were interesting things to choose as well. But it made me think, why isn't the Pope doing that? I don't really understand why Parolin had to do it. And I don't understand why it was sort of... It's a common thing, isn't it, that we've seen with the Pope on numerous occasions. It's like a slightly off to the left answer to a kind of the question that's being asked, and that he gives to someone privately, and then he makes it public. Why? Why has the Vatican made it public? So, and they've done that on numerous occasions with lots of different things. I mean, the thing that I would remember is the Argentinian bishops' guidelines on Amoris Laetitia, which the Pope immediately sort of made public and put in the Sedes Apostolica, so basically making it doctrine or making it sort of part of the Church's teaching. But again, it doesn't make any sense why you just can't be clear about these things. And this is another example to me where it's slightly ambiguous. I mean, it's not difficult to answer these questions. And Cardinal Parolin seems to have been able to give firm answers. Why can't Pope Francis answer it? And also, we keep talking about semiotics, and it's very difficult not to say that this isn't in direct contradiction. That basically the questions that are being asked are, as church teaching changed on these issues, and he keeps, you keep sort of getting these semi-answers that it hasn't, or, I mean, it just sounds like sophistry, the way that all these answers come back. But at the end of the day, all the signals are that he's given out signals to the contrary, which I just find incredibly frustrating. So that's where I stand on it.
Yeah, one of the difficulties is that it's hard to know why there's not greater clarity. But even when there is great clarity, we also have what Gavin mentioned in a previous podcast, that the elevation of those to positions within the church who have spoken purposefully in a way that is ambiguous themselves and draws into question the constant teaching of the church. So it's partly the Pope's lack of clarity, and also even where there is clarity spoken, then this is undermined by the people he puts in these positions. Gavin, why do you think? Well, firstly, do you agree? Do you agree that our Holy Father has not been clear here? And secondly, why do you think there is that lack of clarity?
I had no idea, so I asked Bishop Schneider, and I don't mean to hijack our running order, but if I can just borrow from what we might cover later on, or just a little bit of it. So, I mean, the answer is I had no idea. When I read what Parolin had written, I was really taken aback. So I was both delighted and very surprised. And I had no idea what to make of it, because it runs against the grain of what's going on. So the Catholic Herald is about to release on Thursday, before or after you hear this, a podcast, a conversation he and I had together. And I asked him and said, why Parolin? And he said, quoting Muller, that there has been a takeover in the Vatican. There's been a coup, but it's not 100% yet. It's only a partial coup. So, I mean, it includes Fernandez, obviously, and a few other appointments that the Pope Francis has made. But it clearly doesn't include Parolin yet. Parolin remains old guard. And so Parolin, given his authority, wrote the Catholic answer, which is, well, at least he wrote 2/3 of it. And he wrote 2/3 of the answer, which is the teaching of the church has not changed on same-sex attracted couples and sex outside marriage. It hasn't changed about women deacons and women priests. But he didn't mention communion to divorcees, which was really interesting, because he might have done. So the question, once again, we're faced with a bit more ambiguity. Is the glass half empty or half full? Well, the half empty glass is, why didn't he mention it? Is he adding his weight to those who want this to be the first step of the progressive agenda? Or is the glass half full? And is it quite astonishing and really rather wonderful that against the run of what the autumn synod did, he's re-articulating with some authority and power the teaching of the church. So whatever it is, I'm grateful for it. And I think a lot of people will be too.
Well, you said Schneider talked about a coup. What does he mean by that?
Well, this is what Cardinal Muller has been saying. He's been saying that effectively the characteristic of the Catholic Church is moral and dogmatic clarity, an ever-increasing and developing clarity. But what have we had over the last 10 years? We've had ambiguity and chaos. And Schneider was very careful, saying first of all that this was the fault or the responsibility of people the Pope had appointed. So, it's the kind of the badly advised excuse. Don't touch the CEO, he's been badly advised. But then he let himself go and said, or else he's doing it himself. So I think probably the reality is that our blessed and dear Holy Father is doing it himself and has appointed people. So essentially, this particular papacy is going to have this as its watermark, as its characteristic. But it will be gone soon, and then there'll be another one, and it will have a different characteristic. Everyone is praying that we'll have a more Catholic one rather than a heterodox one. But that's what we're waiting to see. So for the moment, we have a mixed economy in the Vatican, some bits taken over by the coup, some not. Where they're taking over, it's marked by ambiguity and chaos. Where it hasn't been taken over, it's marked by the rearticulation of Orthodox Catholic teaching.
It's interesting because Parolin did support Francis on numerous, especially at the beginning, he was a power broker. So it's like he was given that position because he was a Francis supporter. and especially the China deal he's been sort of involved in. So I don't see him as a good actor, personally. But that does make sense as well from the point of view that as we move towards a conclave, people who are interested in power are laying out their stalls, and this could be Parolin laying out his stall as a more orthodox, potential successor. Personally, I really hope he doesn't go out. We don't get Pope Parolin, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Gavin, you were saying Bishop Schneider had disclosed that there's a number of bishops, in his view, who are Orthodox, faithful, have concerns about the current papacy, but are just praying and being quiet, and perhaps it leads us to conclude that things are worse than they are. What was he saying about that?
Yes, I think for those of us who hold the Orthodox Catholic faith, it's been a bit depressing because there are only a few bishops and cardinals around the world who are offering dubia to the Pope and standing up and saying, I'm going to keep the faith. So I asked Schneider if he'd had any support, because he's one of the brave ones. We know what happened to Bishop Strickland, and indeed Tyler mentioned him. And without being a bit clumsy, it's perfectly obvious it could happen to Schneider as well. So I was asking him, was he getting any support? Are there any more people out there? And he said very encouragingly, and I think this is one reason for listening to the podcast. It's good to hear him say it. He said there are lots of bishops who hold the faith, but they're intimidated. They're keeping their heads down. They don't want to be punished. They don't want their diocese to be put into special measures. And so they're as the phrase goes, going along to get along. But in other circumstances, when the threat is lifted, they will raise their heads and put their shoulders to the wheel. So that's very good news, and all the more credit, I think, to Athanasius Schneider for being willing to put his head above the parapet when the circumstances are not benign. It takes a lot of courage to do that.
Yeah.
I think we've seen that as well in the last few weeks, haven't we, with the reflections, these different synodal reflections coming out from different bishops and archbishops. I think we've been pleasantly surprised, that so many attendees at the synod have been willing to put pen to paper in quite such a vociferous, it's quite excoriating, some of the reflections, and they're done in a fraternal way, but you can imagine that they won't be well received in Rome, however gently they're written.
Archbishop John Wilson, I mean, we've gone, I still have to say thank you to Mark for helping me not speed read an important document and seeing that in fact it was an immensely subtle and powerful rebuttal of the synod, whilst appearing polite on the outside. And Bishop Barron took exactly the same technique. Here are the things I'm grateful for, but there are some shortcomings. And then he really exposed the shortcomings with some degree of potency and vigour. And so I think that is a sign that these are the tip of the iceberg, and that others will be lining up behind them. But thank goodness we have a few people with courage and clarity and orthodox faith. Did
you get a chance to read Archbishop Fisher's yet, from Sydney, the Dominican? That's really worth reading, because it's wrapped in scripture, and it's very much about methodology, and so it's really useful from that point of view. But again, similar thing, brings up similar points.
Yeah, in fact, thank you to our viewers. Some of you have been emailing following our brief discussion on Archbishop John Wilson and Bishop Barron, and also highlighting the Bishop in Sydney, Bishop Fisher. So thank you. Do keep us informed and share things with us. So we're going to get to Strickland again. He was mentioned there a couple of times, but you also met with Bishop Schneider this week on a rainy Sunday afternoon, Mark, and went to his mass in Milton Keynes. He's in Britain and then going to Ireland afterwards. I think he's in Ireland now, perhaps. And as I understand it, they had to move the venue because it turned out to be more popular than they had first planned for, and there was quite a big crowd in attendance. How was that day? Was that worth the rainy drive to Milton Keynes?
I could really do with a few more people in here. So yeah, it was a long drive in the rain, in the mist, But it was great. It was great to see him, and great to see so many friends. It was amazing. A lot of our friends from Stonyhurst, you know, from the teachers. I couldn't believe how many were there, and they hadn't arranged to meet there, but they were all, you know, they were all there. So that was really interesting, and it was a bit of a bizarre place because it was in a school gym.
Yeah,
and you know, a typical Catholic chaos. It took like they had to construct a high altar. But basically, it was a small parish who'd invited him and had agreed to come and do it. And it very quickly became obvious that they didn't have nearly enough space to contain all the people who said that they were coming. And so they had to sort of make emergency arrangements. And the school was really accommodating, you know, generous in letting them.
They're lucky the concrete didn't fall in.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So it was a great occasion. And Bishop Schneider spoke, you know, in encouraging terms about the way that the faith doesn't change. And more than anything else, for me, it's always great to just be with other Catholics and encouraging each other and, you know, having a chat and stuff. So, yeah, I enjoyed it. It's good.
All good. Well, listen out for Gavin's Merely Catholic podcast on the Catholic Herald website and on Spotify and any other place that you might find Gavin on a podcast. Gavin, this is where I'm hoping you'll step in. Apple, Amazon,
I listen to it on Apple. Is it Apple? I think it is. Yes, but also we'll put a link on our Unscripted Facebook page.
We will do that.
So it's direct on the Catholic Herald, isn't it? You can just, that's where I always listen to it. Just click the button on the Catholic Herald page.
There's almost nowhere where it isn't.
There's no escape. I'll put it here. You can go there. You'll find it. And well worth a listen. I said we'd move on to Bishop Strickland again. So he has written a letter saying that he doesn't yet have a document saying why he was dismissed. Would we say dismissed, Mark?
Removed. Well,
removed.
Yeah.
Why he was removed.
That's a really interesting point, because the Vatican actually, when they published it, they said resigned, but he hasn't resigned.
Yeah, because he said, I'm a shepherd and my flock need me, and quite rightly so. So he was removed. I think we thought at one point, a few episodes back, that he wouldn't be removed, but he has been. And he said in this letter that there were no administrative problems brought to his attention, and that it was, in fact, for reasons related to speaking the truth of our faith. He believes it was that he's been on the radar since he spoke out about McCarrick many years ago, and says, my main crime is bringing to light that which others wish to remain hidden. So he's got no diocese, but he is still a bishop. And his advice, as he concludes his letter, is the advice we all need to follow and share, which is when we're tempted to get angry and feel let down in the church. And I know a number of people have contacted us and saying that they are fed up and they want to leave, that is, he confirms that is not the right answer. Never leave the church, he says, and asks us to focus on personal sanctity. Go to Mass, keep your family strong, pray, sacrifice, fast, and all those things. So Archbishop Strickland's letter. Mark, I think you've done your own video on this, have you? Or
no, I haven't done
going through more detail.
It was one of those things. I did a video last night and I decided to do it on something else, but there were a number of things going on, so it's great to get together and have a chat about it, because, you know, these are all really important things that it's worth discussing. And I think the ongoing saga of Bishop Joseph Strickland is absolutely, in a way, it's wonderful, you know, because he's such a, I think in any other papacy he would just be Mr. boring, middle of the road, normal, you know, and he doesn't say anything particularly profound or anything like that. He just repeats, and he recognises that he's reading the catechism. That's what he says that he does, and yet it's become such an anathema to Francis's papacy. The great irony for me is that this is the Pope of parousia and dialogue and accompaniment and widening the tent and on and on and on. This is all we hear from Pope Francis. And yet he couldn't pick up the phone and speak to one of his brother bishops. from the beginning of his papacy, he's made great play of the fact that he wants the bishops to have more authority, and for it to be more collegial, the way that the church is run. And when he wrote Amoris Laetitia, Laudato Si, is the one I'm particularly thinking of. Like all the references were, it was really unusual reading it, because normally when you read a papal document, it's got, papal encyclicals and scripture and all this stuff, and all the footnotes, not all of the footnotes, but I mean, it was so obvious on every single page. I counted them up at one point. There were references to different bishops' conferences. So he's sort of he's validating his rhetoric by reference to sort of, some far-flung bishops' conferences. And it's almost like he was trying to get them on board with his project or something. I don't know. So the point that I'm making is that this has been part of his shtick since he started. But here, he can't even pick up the phone. Like, if it was us three, if it was anyone, if it was at work or anything, and someone was, and like, say, Catherine, you were going, "Oh, I'm really upset with Mark. He's saying this thing, and I don't agree with it," then, like, surely we'd have a conversation. That would be the first thing, and say, "But what's the problem?"
I think you're making the mistake of invoking disillusion 1.0 when we should be dealing with disillusion 2.0. So disillusion 1.0 is hypocrisy. It's saying one thing and doing another. Accompaniment, negotiation, not doing it. What's wrong with you? But actually the progressive left strategy is 2.0. I'm going to use a word to mask what I'm really doing, and I'm going to deliberately use it for a particular campaign. And the difficulty with the papal campaign, I'm sorry to say this because it's always hurtful to criticize the Pope, and one does it with great reluctance. But the difficulty is that all these words have been designed to produce a progressive agenda. They haven't been designed to do what the person in the street takes them to be. And so we shouldn't be disillusioned at his hypocrisy. We should be disillusioned by the progressive agenda that these words are designed to mask and bring in. And that's why many of us look forward so much and pray so earnestly for a new Pope who will mean what he says and will not be implementing the spirit of the world in the church.
I totally understand that. And that what I'm trying to do actually is to highlight that it is hypocrisy, and the fact that at no point is there any correlation between his words and his actions. And if that is the case, then it quite clearly is just all agenda. And we've seen that throughout. What's been interesting is the way that, say, the Synod Office, in this particular instance, more than in any other, have used all that language and rhetoric, and while at the same time doing exactly the opposite. And that I found extraordinary, was that one of the dicasteries was able to follow through so brilliantly with Pope Francis's sort of hypocritical agenda in that regard. That was quite extraordinary that they were able to follow it through so precisely. So I really think that this is could be a turning point, though, with Strickland, where we see the mask, for so many people who were prepared to say, "Oh no, this can't be Pope Francis because of dialogue and all that." Now we're seeing it. The mask has slipped, and you've got this situation where you can say quite clearly, okay, you think you're saying you're about dialogue and accompaniment and all these things. Well, where's the dialogue and accompaniment in this? So the point really that I'm trying to make is that I think this gives us a brilliant, weapon, if you like, against the facade and the lies, to be able to cut through that untruth and to be able to say, let's have a look at what's really going on here. And if it's this, then Pope Francis can't really be doing what he says he's going to do, because this is, and like I say, there's nothing. Like, you can pick out the particular things that he's had a go at Strickland about, but you can't see them being a massive problem for anything more. And especially when you compare it to things like, you've got Bishop Bonney, who's issued a document accepting euthanasia. So he's accepting the murder of the innocent. He hasn't been removed from office. You've got Bishop Wiseman in Speyer, I think it's Wiseman, who's issued protocols for the blessing of same-sex unions, which directly contradicts the teaching from the Church, obviously, but also the Vatican's answer to the German bishops. So he's directly contradicting that. He's still in office. He hasn't been removed. So what has Strickland done? Strickland, all right, he went on Twitter and he said, I'm not on board with Pope Francis undermining the magisterium. Well, what's wrong with that? I don't think no one's on board with anyone undermining the magisterium, aren't they? But if you thought, well, actually, I'm not undermining the magisterium, then you would, I would think you'd get on the phone and say, look, what's all this about me undermining the magisterium? And you'd clear it up, wouldn't you? Or at least you get one of your useful oppos to do it. But he hasn't done. But there was none of that. It's just good night.
It's interesting, isn't it, how we in the church, they say one thing and mean another, and there's this ambiguity, and it's in the world as well, and it's not easy to work out whether the church is trying to conform to a world that is so ambiguous and lost touch with reality, and or because the church is, you sort of have this sense that if you cleaned out all the filth in the church, that our society around us would improve. That, that maybe because the church has been so filthy for so long, that our society has crumbled around us, and the only way to improve everything else is, as Chesterton said, for the church to move the world. So if Bishop Strickland is a little light, and many others are, that have the courage to, as he said, to not hide things and to bring them to the fore, then that's got to have a good impact far more widely than just the church, because it's Holy Mother Church. So obviously it's going to, yes, Gavin.
Well, I just wanted to say that the very beautiful thing you've just said is said slightly less beautifully by St. Macarius, and it's in the Office of Readings today. Well, I was going to suggest that we put it up. And it's exactly it's a very poetic way of expanding on what you've been saying, which is that if Christ is not in a place, it becomes derelict. And so St. Macarius uses the image of a garden or a house that's not inhabited, and how quickly it becomes dirty, confused, rotten. And when Christ comes into a place, an institution, a soul, immediately he begins to clean it up, and it becomes fragrant. And so it's just exactly what you've been saying. But I was struck this morning saying my prayers, and particularly it was during this my Facebook liturgy. I thought, as I read from St. Macarius, a reading from the Office of Readings today, I thought this is a very powerful and an extraordinarily beautiful way of explaining how our Lord makes new, makes people new, makes things new. So it's what you were saying. Oh, that's very clever.
Yeah, I did it without moving my hands.
Oh, I'm so impressed.
You should be.
Well, there it is. It's absolutely beautiful. And so thank you for saying it the way you did, and reminding me of his attempt to say something as beautifully.
Well, I was keen today to talk a little bit about the nuns, not the holy nuns with their habits. Hello, nuns, but the
don't get Gavin started on nuns.
Yeah, I know.
We
went to Chicago last year, and Gavin revealed his great love for nuns, and there's a picture that might just follow of a cabinet full of quite strange nun dolls. In fact, we'll say no more about it. So nons, N-O-N-Es. Bishop Barron speaks a lot about.
You really weren't talking about nuns.
I'm really not talking about them.
Flush me out.
I've got a lot of editing to do there on the nuns. To you guys today that I had read in Crisis magazine, an article written about how we can reach the nons, the N-O-N-Es, those who are of no religious affiliation, especially young people. And this author was really quite critical. And he writes, you can read the article, I'll link it here, but he writes, the falling away from Christianity by young people is often the result of them cultivating shallowness, simplicity, and solipsism as a philosophy of life. He goes on, "You idiot" is one of the most useful but rejected phrases in any effective evangelical strategy. Before we can reach the nuns with the good, the true, and the beautiful, we need to shake them out of their willed imbecility. They fear missing out, but what they really should fear is our mockery, our derision of their juvenile prejudices. He's quite tough on the nuns. In fact, I think he finishes with, until that is achieved, arguments about truth will miss the mark. Christian humility, charity, and generosity will not move them. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And as we know, down in Mississippi, that's where he's writing from, that often begins with fearing what daddy might think if we don't uphold the family name and walk straight in the ways of God. You want to win the nuns? Treat them rough, is what he says. What do you think about that advice? How we draw the nuns back in? Not your nuns, Gavin.
Well, I'd like to talk about two of my strategies over the last 20 years. When I was a university chaplain, I had a group called Skeptics Anonymous. And what it meant was that I left my faculty door open on Tuesdays between 4 and 5, and people would come in and ask questions. So there were anywhere between half a dozen and 2 dozen students and faculty. And the idea was it would produce a space where people could ask the kind of questions that you're saying the nones or the nuns don't ask. But and when I was a parish priest, I did the same thing, except that I would invite people into the vicarage to read the Bible and to ask these questions, but they'd only come when they'd suffered a bit. So there were 2 rules. One is I had to have encountered them 3 times pastorally, a wedding, a baptism, and a funeral, for example, 3 funerals. And they had to be scratching their heads and saying, what's all this about? So it would happen in the supermarket or in the pub. Someone would say, oh, vicar, I don't see how you can possibly believe when. And then they'd say, there's been an earthquake, whatever. And I would then say, well, come to my either my vicarage or my faculty office, and we'll talk about it. And week by week, I got groups together to do exactly that. And people then got converted because after talking about it, we then began to look at Jesus. But they have to want to find out. And usually it's only suffering that does it because, as you say, we're all imbued in complacency, and we just, it's enough to manage and to cope for most people, to pay the bills and to have our basic needs met. But one of the things that suffering does is to provoke sharp questions. And that's the point when the church ought to be there. Well, the trouble is the church and the faith often look like we're just an arm of the superego telling people how to behave and taking them off when they don't. What we should really be doing is getting alongside people saying, we are the people who ask questions, but we never stop asking questions. The whole point about being a pilgrim and being a theologian is to go on re-articulating the questions better and doing it in company, which is what I think Unscripted is to some extent. That's what we're doing here. We're not trying to saying we know the answers. We're trying to look at the facts, scratch our heads, reformulate the questions, and see whether through some kind of collective wisdom and the Holy Spirit we can find our way forward. So I think that's the process, and absolutely right. That's how we must reach out and touch the knowns, but they may not come until they're in pain. Mm. In other words, only pain will start the questioning process going. For most of us, it's the C.S. Lewis again. God whispers in our, what was it? He whispers in our happiness, but pain is the megaphone to rouse a sleeping world.
Yeah, so true. I was listening to Nick Cave. If anyone's familiar with Nick Cave, an Australian rock star who sings, well, he was in a band called The Birthday Party, and quite dark, sings a lot about killing and God and
cheery
stuff. But it was very interesting listening to him. In fact, he must be in his 50s or even early 60s now. I'm not sure. Sorry, Nick, if you're only 45.
He's had a hard life.
He has had a hard life. A very hard life. In fact, he lost both his sons. One, I think, actually, I don't know the full story, but was found at the bottom of a cliff in Brighton. He's now living in the UK. And another, I'm not sure of the circumstances, but absolutely the most tragic thing you can imagine happening to a parent. And what's absolutely fascinating about his account is that he said, although you might think that would make him angry and take him further from any idea of a God, it was that brought him, he doesn't quite describe himself as a Christian, but it's that brought him to God and to understand the transcendent. And he now spends his time answering questions for people. He said it gave him a sense of purpose. You'd have to hear him. And again, that's something else I'll have to link if you're interested. But that's just one example. But there are many, many examples of people who have come to Christ in exactly that way, through suffering. Peter Croft always says, and if I say Peter Croft, it probably means C.S. Lewis, that, of course, we're not made for this world. So if we become too comfortable, we won't want to leave. So we always have that eternal vision in mind. Mark, what do you think about this idea that we have to be tougher on the nuns, no more messing about, no more I love you, I'll walk with you, but you idiots, you're so stupid, you're silly, and here's where you're wrong? Good approach?
Yeah. Oh, that'd be my approach with a lot of this stuff, especially, the complete intellectual shallowness that we see from a lot of this sort of a lot of these positions today. I just think it's absolutely ridiculous, and that worries me. When we present the faith, I think as well it's important that we embrace the vast intellectual tradition of the Church of Christianity, really, that built the West, and the intellectual tradition and medicine and science, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. And anytime I see it being sort of dumbed down, it really upsets me, because it is an authentic answer. And with our new gadget here, I was just going to see if I could show you like a couple of things on that. I don't know if you saw this on the. I posted this on our Facebook page.
Did you do that? Good Lord.
It's clever,
yeah,
isn't it?
that's brilliant.
So, like, we have two options in life: to suffer with Christ or to suffer without Him.
Yeah.
And it's the realization of that really, like, that is the stark reality of our existence. If you are an atheist, it's not like you do away with the pain or the suffering. You just do away without the answer to that suffering.
If I was as clever as Mark, I would immediately reach out for my prefabricated C.S. Lewis quote and say, it's always a question of my will or thy will be done. But I'm not as clever as Mark, and I haven't got access to it. Look at that.
So this is another one that I saw the other day. I'll put this on Twitter. I don't know if you saw it, but
yeah, that's very good.
Jim Carrey. So, and it's. I think it's speaking to that nun thing, because the thing is that so many people today, as you say, it's a case of apathy, isn't it? Where they feel like they're comfortable. So why bother with what on earth could possibly be added by God? But we know that as St. Augustine put it, our hearts are restless, O Lord, until they rest in you. And the thing that you're looking for is Jesus, isn't it? The thing that Jim Carrey is the answer.
Yeah.
Jim Carrey is looking for there is Christ. And
all I can think of.
You don't even necessarily know that. You go on, Gavin. Sorry. No,
I'm so sorry. I'm being the naughty child at the back of the class. All I can think of is how I can get a whole load of memes so that I can compete with Mark and flash them up on the screen. Please, miss, can I be excused?
Not yet. Yeah, I think that's true. We're looking for things that will fill that gap, and we don't know that it's only Christ who can. Only this morning I was speaking with my sister-in-law, who's just moved over from the Middle East, from Qatar, where she, by her own recognition, has had an incredibly comfortable life. Had a maid and many expensive handbags and all her material needs met. And she'd lived there for 17 years and said she just got so fed up of it and couldn't wait to move into our house where she could experience some real suffering. So that's how things are at the moment. But no, she wanted to move away. And I think because you do get to a point, why else would the highest rates of suicide and depression be in the West? Where we have the highest, levels of comfort and material wealth, but there's always that correlation between those levels of material wealth and the high rates of depression and suicide. So clearly, that isn't the answer. I spoke. Those of you that watch this podcast frequently will know that just a few months ago, I said that my eldest stepdaughter is being received into the Catholic Church at Easter, and she's a very clever young woman. She studied neuroscience at university, has always had an inquiring mind, and she's only 26. And so I went to her with this question, and I said to her, what does she think about how we might be able to reach the nons, the NONEs? And in fact, just this morning, she said she was at the gym and she spoke to 3 people her age who are not university educated. They're from working class families. And she started asking them questions about things like what is good and what's happiness and why are some things bad and some things good. This is all at the gym. And the funny thing is, she said this was really interesting. Their reaction, all 3 of them, was really, wow. It was complete wow. They said they have never been asked these questions before and have never been made to think in this way. They said nobody speaks about these things. And the key, she said, is having access to these conversations, which many people don't have. And she said, if you're working in a company now as a young person, she's in pharmaceuticals, and she said there are certain things that you absolutely have to adopt. Like, so you can't say Christmas. They have memos saying you have to say Winter Festival, all the LGBT stuff. And if you try and raise anything or get people to question anything, she said you could see it during the COVID pandemic. People just didn't question things, that we're not practiced in questioning. And so she said, speaking to these, she said, in a way, actually, these young people who have been working hard since 16, who didn't go to university, they're not stupid, they're just not highly educated in the way that some of her other friends are, actually have that openness. One person she spoke to said, I think there's something more than just my body, but couldn't really explain what or why. There's something else going on. And so just this morning, she had a short conversation, and she did actually say, this is so Emily, she said, I sent them away with some homework. So she sent them away to think about things. But for her observation was, it's really the access. When do people access those kind of questions? Who's asking those kind of questions? And for these young people to say, wow, at 26, I've never been asked that. I've never thought about it. It's never crossed my mind. I've just bimbled along through life.
It's so sad.
Yeah, it's so sad. But also it's so hopeful, because when she did ask it, they were like, wow, I never thought about it. I'm going to go away and think about it. Whereas I think her educated friends, I think her friends who've gone and had qualifications, done a master's, done a PhD, they think they know best, I think. And they're not open in the way that these others, and it's not to say they're not clever, because they are, of course, but just have maybe that openness. So Gavin, it goes back to your Skeptics Anonymous. What you did there was you provided that access, that point of access, to say, whether it's suffering that's brought you here or anything else, you have that place where you can ask the questions. And it's when you ask those questions of people and listen to the questions from people that I think then those channels can be open. Sorry, Mark.
Well, I was talking to a friend the other day, and we were saying you'd be like watching the debates on YouTube that go on in the Oxford Union these days. You'd be terrified if your kids went there, because exactly as you just said, it's not that they would think that they were the smartest kids in the world, but actually when you listen to the debates, they don't seem to know anything, and instead they just uncritically receive this strange philosophy. It was even on Radio 4 the other day. I think they were doing a programme on Aristotle, and they were saying, like, at the end of it, it was like, what do you, asking these professors, what do you take away from your study of Aristotle? And they were saying that we don't teach moral philosophy, and it's having a detrimental effect on society, which is terrifying, isn't it? That moral philosophy. So we're not teaching our young people how to think critically about moral action. I don't think
it's just a cultural thing. One of the things I was really quite surprised with is when I was younger, I had a couple of really clever friends who got scholarships to Oxford and Cambridge. And one of the things I've noticed as the years went by is they appear to have stopped thinking at some point. As it happens, being less intelligent, I've had to go on thinking in order just to keep up. But I was very surprised to discover that they had just stopped. They'd stopped thinking, they stopped learning, they'd become settled in entrenched opinions, which weren't good enough. I mean, none of our opinions are good enough, because there's a journey of wisdom and depth that all of us are called to pursue. But so it's partly a cultural thing. It was better in the 60s and 70s. It's got much worse. But I think one of the things the church will always be doing is providing places for people to ask the questions. And life will certainly provide enough pain and enigma to play its part. We've got to catch them when they trip.
And also, I think, what causes you to ask questions? So when I think about when I was young, I'm the daughter of a storyteller. My father's a storyteller, like really a brilliant storyteller. It's not something everyone can do. And I'm of Irish background, and as I know you are, Mark. And so we were sort of rooted in story, in myth, in a sense of mystery. And I think of that little part in Screwtape, the Screwtape letters, which I've revisited just recently, where Screwtape says to Wormwood, is that right?
Yeah.
Says, oh no, he's starting to read for pleasure. He's starting to read a book and enjoy a story just for the pleasure of it. Get him to stop and go and read some high-minded thing to learn more about an issue, to learn more about a topic, to be well informed, some academic book. And I thought there's really something to note about that actually I don't think so. Schools have become exam factories. You don't learn because of the sheer beauty of learning and truth and discovering truth. You learn to pass an exam.
Yeah.
And so we've lost, I think, that notion of just, that's why reading fairy tales to your children or encouraging them to read them. Actually, I think what that will do, although you think, well, that's a waste of time, they could be reading this academic book and that academic book and passing this exam. I think it then prepares them and opens them up to then find the right questions to ask so that the right answer can be given. So it's sort of preparing the ground in that way that I think we just don't encourage anymore. And especially with our technological age, life is, books on a shelf. That's get books.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you can see it. And that's why I think it's so important to have conversations with your children and to tell them stories and to go on walks and to give them the space that they need to ask these questions and to have these discussions. Because as soon as you get into a conversation, you can see that they've got the same questions. Of course, we've all got these big questions, haven't we? But life is so, like with the internet and all that sort of stuff, it's so mechanized in lots of ways. Increasing sympathy with Tolkien's Luddite tendencies as I get older. I kind of think that like our ability to just do things in the garden or to make little things has become less and less, to the point where if I do a little bit of DIY, I feel really proud of myself these days. But
who's told us about your DIY?
Yeah,
we'd committed ourselves to asking questions, to dealing with the questions that some of our listeners and audience and friends present us. So that's going to be part of our own agenda, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Good point, Gavin, to mention that we are encouraging. We're just beginning really to try and improve or form what it is that we're trying to offer, and we'd like you to contact us with questions, to take a look at our membership options, and there will be the chance to build this members community where we hope to have calls like this where people can join in and join the conversation. But it's absolutely true. And you mentioned there in going into the garden, Mark, and getting close to nature, because of course nature is God's created. It's the givenness of nature, isn't it, that we're so distant from, and that's when you start to ask questions about how and why and that sense of mystery and awe. So they say that amongst farmers, there's a very low uptake of those transitioning from male to female or vice versa. And it sounds silly, but actually in a way, it's quite an interesting observation because they're just so close to nature and close to the reality that it's very clear what a male and a female are and that they're not the same.
Yeah, no, it's one of my things is that I kind of feel as we move away from reality, and become more engaged in virtual reality and in computing, and we spend more and more time in the virtual world, that this is the way that we seem to be progressing. It's like that we haven't got any real physical challenges or threats. We live in a secure society governed by the rule of law, and we're so in some way we're gravitating away from, and so our society is making up things like some of those issues, and it's like something to make you special or different or interesting, and it's because we haven't got anything real to deal with in lots of ways. We're fed, we're watered, we've got somewhere comfortable to stay, even if it's mum and dad's basement. And so you have to think of something interesting about yourself to differentiate your life from everyone else's. That's got to be a dimension of it, hasn't it? I think we're seeing the evolution, even if it's a rapid one, of humanity in that respect.
Yeah, so true. It's that level, that comfortable. We're just too comfortable. And so it's as Jordan Peterson says, you chew your own arm off just to have something to do. So as we get comfortable, people are asking questions, and that's where we need to step in. So keep questioning, keep answering questions, and I think we may leave it there. Gavin, you look like you're keen to get going. What are you doing? Cooking a
I'm
steak?
chewing my arm off because GB News are just texting me saying, "Are you going to appear on our show in 10 minutes' time to answer the questions of whether or not AI can replace clergy and whether artificial intelligence can produce sermons as well as
some
clergy?"
of them probably.
Or it does. Yeah.
So my phone has been buzzing saying we're looking forward to joining us quite shortly. So
Good.
Quite shortly.
So let's move on to Cardinal Burt. All right, we'll let you go. Join us next time. Thank you for watching. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
Without sufficient maids or handbags, I'm Gavin Ashington. God bless you. Thank you for your help and your support.